Community, SANGHA. SANGHA is the third of the three jewels. Loosely translated, it means community. It's where Buddha and Dharma find their expression, where we're supported in putting those principles into action. It's a community of friends practicing the Dharma together in order to develop our own awareness and to maintain it. The traditional definition of SANGHA originally described monastic communities of ordained monks and nuns, but in many Buddhist traditions, it has evolved to include the wider spiritual community. For us, our SANGHA is our community of both Dharma practice and recovery. Our Recovery Dharma SANGHA is decentralized and peer-led, and meetings should be open, safe, and accessible spaces that try to uphold our core principles of mindfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and generosity. The advice in this chapter comes from the collective experience of hundreds of local groups, and so it's offered in the spirit of friendly guidance rather than direction. The essence of a SANGHA is awareness, understanding, acceptance, harmony, integrity, and loving kindness. Recovery begins when we learn to pay attention to and investigate experience in the present moment. It's through the SANGHA that we first learn to be fully present, that we stop trying to satisfy our craving and turn to an understanding of our thoughts, feelings, sense experience, and actions that include others. This understanding is fundamentally relational. Our actions have consequences on not only our own lives, but also on the people with whom we meet and share experiences. Many of us learned this the hard way, by hurting the ones we loved while we were in active addiction. A core part of our recovery includes making amends to those we have hurt, including ourselves. As we've seen, our recovery includes the wise intention to heal the suffering we have caused others, and to act wisely to avoid creating the same suffering in the future. SANGHA provides the opportunity to practice a central part of recovery, remembering. Remembering our past suffering and reflecting on our current path supports our recovery and energizes our practice of compassion, loving kindness, generosity, and forgiveness. Sharing these reflections with others who are also struggling with addictive behaviors helps give us confidence in our own ability to recover our true nature, our potential for awakening. SANGHA enlarges our perspective and begins to give us the self-confidence and self-respect that will let us reflect on the ups and downs of recovery without discouragement or hopelessness. When we feel inspired to practice with wise friends, we can trust them to point out with compassion when we fall short of our intentions, and we can be honest with ourselves. The teachings of the Buddha clearly stress that this is not just something we can do on our own. And many programs of recovery, including our own, emphasize the importance of going to meetings and working with others in recovery. Not every meeting is going to speak to you. Keep trying new meetings until one resonates. It's with the support of others that so many of us have found relief from the suffering and isolation brought on by our addictions. It's through being of service that we've been able to get out of our own heads and experience a more sustainable and authentic joy than our addictions have provided. Many of us have found that there's a quality to our meditations that's different when practiced with a group. Particularly when we're getting started, it can be easy to give up or space out after a few minutes. Practicing with others can often give us the motivation to stick with it long enough to start experiencing some of the benefits of practice. And through sharing our experience and listening to what others have to say, we can see how we're not alone in a lot of our challenges. This can come as a welcome surprise after years of suffering shame and feeling like an outcast. Many of us, having habitually isolated ourselves, have found that sharing silence at a meeting creates an atmosphere of trust and can be a calming way to get used to being with others. No one is required to speak or participate in meetings. Passing is always an option when it comes time to share. There's never any requirement to believe in anything, to identify yourself in any way, much less to become a Buddhist or serious practitioner. The wisdom and tools are available to everyone, wherever they are on their path. But not every meeting is going to be a fit for every person. You may live in an area where there are several different options to choose from, or there may be only a single recovery meeting near you, or none at all. Fortunately, there are also online meetings, many of which can be joined by phone. You can also start your own meeting. However you find them, Trust that there are wise friends and a SANGHA out there for you. Isolation and connection. Addiction and addictive behavior can create people without roots. Some of us have been uprooted from our families and from society. We wander around feeling as though we're not quite whole because our addictions feed our isolation and loneliness. Many of us come from broken families, feel rejected, or have been isolated from society through incarceration or institutionalization. Not all of us have disconnected to that degree, but we do tend to live on the margins, looking for a home, for somewhere to belong. A community of practice, a SANGHA, can provide a second chance to someone who's become alienated from society, or just a comfortable place to bring all of ourselves, including parts we don't usually share with others. If the community of practice is organized with cultural humility and an open, friendly, compassionate atmosphere, we can find support for our practice and recovery. In our addictions, we self-medicated or engaged in behaviors that helped us deal with the pain of separation. The relief was temporary, of course, often leaving us more lonely and isolated than before, yet we returned to it again and again. For many of us, it was the only way we knew to relieve the pain. Even in sobriety, when faced with well-meaning but insistent people telling us how to overcome our addictions, the instinct for many of us is to keep to ourselves. It's a habitual way of being in the world that a lot of us share. It wasn't just getting high, though for a lot of people in this fellowship and outside it, that was the main road we took to escape. There were other traps that snagged us, even if we never struggled with substances. Sex, food, self-harm, social media. We may have tried to get help with those compulsions, but often found others minimizing or trivializing them, especially in comparison to drug or alcohol abuse. For those of us whose primary addictions are around behaviors and processes, we may have felt alienated and excluded from recovery itself. Many of us found ourselves like raw, exposed nerves when we stopped using those ways to escape. And sometimes, the last place we wanted to be was in a room with strangers in a circle of chairs all facing each other, talking about how we can't drink or use or participate in our destructive behaviors anymore. The paradox is that it's in that kind of space, where we're accepted as we are, that we can begin to let go of our reflex to hide. Many of us lost the ability, if we ever had it, to form relationships without the social lubricant of alcohol or drugs. Sometimes that was because we dealt with rejection, trauma, or loss at an early age and became anxious and avoidant around others. Or maybe we just felt different from everyone else since the day we were born, or came from a small community or a big family and got sick of people nosing into our business. Whatever reasons we had to isolate, we got to a point where it stopped serving us. The substances and behaviors we used to protect ourselves began to harm ourselves and others. We drove people away to be safe, and as a result, we became even more lonely. Many of us are perennial outsiders. We felt abandoned by our own families, schools, religious institutions, the government, and society's marginalization of non-dominant identities. As a result, we came to mistrust organizations and groups, and even the idea of belonging itself. The double bind there, of course, was that because we never allowed anyone to get to know us, we cut off the possibility of ever belonging. The Buddha taught that nothing and nobody exists on its own. He said, "Since this exists, that exists. And since this does not exist, that does not exist." We're connected to other people through the way we interact, through the air we share, through our existence together in nature. Trying to ignore or resist this interconnection is basically trying to destroy something which already exists. This doesn't mean that we're literally dependent on others for our life and our existence, but that the life and existence of everybody and everything develops through their relationships with things outside themselves. The food they eat, the environment they live in, the history and the circumstances of their world. It's a great web of being that each of us is connected to without any effort of our own. And being aware of that connection gives us the ability to have meaningful and positive relationships with others. It is a choice each of us has to decide what we want to do with the reality of our connection. SANGHA, in a very broad sense, means being willing to let other people in, to let them matter. To do that, we have to be willing to allow other people to let us in. When we can even consider the possibility of that happening, there's the potential for us to move toward liberation, and the benefits are felt almost immediately. All of us, during our development and experience of life, had experiences that have made us doubt our own voices, or the value or wisdom of expressing those voices. Many of these doubts contributed to the suffering we experienced during addiction and have continued to make it difficult to connect to our own recovery. Our meetings are intended to be places where we can feel safe and comfortable authentically expressing what we really feel and experience. However, many of us, because of past experiences in both social settings and in the recovery community, struggle with this. We often struggle just to understand our feelings and experiences. Your recovery Sangha can be one that focuses on helping and encouraging those many voices. Often, for those of us who identify as BIPOC, LGBTQ, or other non-dominant identities, we may wish to attend affinity meetings with others who share our identities. Affinity meetings can be a good place to start feeling safe, seen, and heard. If you're interested in an affinity meeting that does not exist, we encourage you to start one. Our program is one of empowerment, and that includes the support of collective healing and the cultivation of resilience in order to recover our true nature from the suffering imposed on us. In the Buddhist tradition, it's not just that we don't have to do this work alone, it's that we need the support of others on the path to waking up. In a famous story, the Buddha's cousin and assistant Ananda came to visit him and remarked, "This is half of the holy life. Having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues." The Buddha disagreed, saying, "Having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues is actually the whole of the holy life." When we come together to talk honestly about ourselves and what happened in our lives, something very powerful can happen. When we see people committing to be who they truly are, with all their imperfections and their longing to be free, our hearts naturally begin to open because their realness allows us to be more real. In their vulnerability, our wise, admirable friends give us the freedom to be vulnerable ourselves and to speak our own truths. So our Sangha becomes the place where we are supported and encouraged to stay on the path, even when it's challenging or our progress seems stuck. Our wise friends are, often without words, telling us that if we keep going, so will they. And that can make all the difference in our lives. Reaching out. For many of us in early recovery, asking for help feels almost impossible. But we have found, as difficult as it can be, that it can literally save our lives and that with practice it becomes easier. Asking for help is not just important because it can get results. At times, in fact, it might not. Even with a lot of help and support, things can stand in our way. Sometimes what we want from the world and from ourselves is just more than what's available. However, even if asking for help may not always get us what we want, it will always help get us through. When we practice accepting help from people, we become a little more open and a little less stuck. It's the decision to reach out, as much as the answer we receive, that can give us what we need to move forward. Nevertheless, that decision is often a heavy lift for us. Many of us have done things during our active addictions that we're not proud of. Some of the decisions we made in the past have far-reaching consequences that continue to impact our lives even after we begin our recovery. We may have worn a mask of competence or fearlessness or blamelessness, and the fear of what might happen when we take the mask off may keep us from reaching out. We may be afraid that if we ask people in our lives for help with financial problems, legal trouble, or other issues, we might lose them. We might worry that they will no longer respect us or accept us once the mask is gone, because we fear being revealed as broken, fundamentally flawed people. We may have gotten used to hiding a part of ourselves due to past experiences of rejection. We may even be afraid that there's nothing behind the mask, that we're simply empty underneath. We practice compassion for all beings, including ourselves, to see the truth beneath those fears, that there is a loving and lovable heart within all of us. We come to see clearly that those around us feel more pain watching us struggle alone than they would if we let them in. And of course, by shutting people out and refusing to let them see our struggles, we'll often bring about the isolation and loss that we were trying to avoid in the first place. So, in view of our own suffering and the pain we can cause to those closest to us, we can see that asking for help is not selfish. In fact, it is an act of great compassion to ourselves and others. Those who have shared the pain of addiction and isolation understand fear and shame better than we might imagine. Through listening at meetings and sharing our own experiences, we begin to see how we're not uniquely broken or flawed. And it's often easier to ask for help from someone other than those people with whom we are closest. In meetings, we often practice openness and acceptance in learning how others may have different experiences of hurt and trauma. In addition to the people in our SANGHA, there may be counselors and other professionals in our community who can be a resource when we need someone with experience and a greater degree of objectivity. Some clinics and universities even offer counseling on a sliding scale, so we may not have to eliminate that option just for financial reasons. Of course, we know intellectually that our problems become easier to face when we have help, but emotionally, we may still feel fear. Again, it's the decision to give it a try that may be more valuable than the outcome itself. We learn that letting people in and being a little more vulnerable are not as frightening as we may have thought. In fact, we may find it less daunting than trying to face our problems alone. When we make a practice of asking for help, we frequently find that it improves both the quantity and quality of our relationships in general. Even if you don't become personally close with people in your SANGHA outside of meetings, you may find that you are able to connect with more people on a deeper level, and that could be something entirely new in your life. Even if you are seeking help from a spiritual leader, a therapist, or some other professional, notice how opening up to another person affects how much you trust them. Is there a deepening of respect and feeling of safety as your ability to be transparent grows? This confidence and security may also bring benefits to your other relationships. Try to notice these changes as they arise, and give yourself credit for taking steps that are often difficult. It's common to worry that sharing your problems with people will cause them to look down on you, burden them with your baggage, or even upset them. And while we must be honest in acknowledging that may be a risk, we also know that remaining isolated can be a much greater risk to ourselves and to others. There is great truth in the cliché that burdens are lighter when they're shared. Most of us felt as if an enormous weight had been removed from our shoulders when we made the choice to not be alone with our problems anymore. And as we experience relief, we find that asking for help becomes significantly easier. When we first come into recovery, we may not immediately have easy access to our inner wisdom. Many of us have been relying on the delusions of fear and shame and reactivity as our guides in life. It takes time to lift those veils, to dig through those layers in order to break those habits and begin to see clearly. For many of us, it takes time to be able to trust ourselves. But we can look to our SANGHA, our community of wise friends on the path, for guidance and wisdom. When we don't know what to do, when we lose faith that we can make it through this craving, when we're lost in obsession and can't make sense of our own minds and hearts, when the world feels upside down, when we are crawling out of our skin with discomfort, when we have no idea what the next wise step is, this is when we can and must reach out to our SANGHA for help. Because those in our SANGHA have gone through what we have. They've made it to the other side, and they can show us how to do so as well. Wise friends and mentors. Many, if not most, recovery meetings are focused on meditating together, reading literature or exploring specific topics, and sharing. There are no requirements for attendance other than a respectful curiosity, and meetings are a great opportunity for newcomers to learn about the program. Sometimes, those who have decided to commit to this program of recovery want more support on the path. This is where the idea of a wise friend or mentor comes in. The Buddha talked about 4 kinds of friends: the helpful friend, the kind of friend who sticks with you through good times and bad; the compassionate friend, and the mentor. A wise friend supports us through example, kindness, and compassion. It can be anyone in the Sangha who we trust to act as a guide, a supporter, or just a fellow traveler on the path. This relationship may take many forms, but it is one built on honesty, compassion, healthy boundaries, and a shared intention to support one another's recovery. For some of us, especially newcomers, it's helpful to work with a mentor, a wise friend who's been in the program for a while who gives support, is there to reach out to when times get rough, and can help hold us accountable. It's not a formal position. Nobody is certified or authorized to be a mentor. They are just members of the community freely sharing their journey through the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. Anyone may choose to collaborate with someone on their path, understanding that each person must ultimately do the work of recovery. Clear communication about expectations from both people is important. There are no strict rules, but if you are asked to help someone else in this way, it's a good idea to have someone who's done it before to support you. It's also strongly encouraged that you commit to the 5 precepts, at least as far as the supportive relationship is concerned. Many people form study or practice groups in addition to attending regular meetings, in order to give and receive help from wise friends on their path of recovery. Some call these Kalyanamita groups, the Pali term for wise or admirable friends. Some call them Dharma buddies. Whatever the name, people gather to explore particular aspects of the path in a smaller group, like practicing longer periods of sitting meditation, having Sangha retreats, studying Buddhist texts, or listening to recorded Dharma talks. There's no one way to run these kinds of groups, and no special experience is needed to start one. You can experiment for yourself, and also look to the experience of established groups for ideas. There are also groups that have formed to support individuals in writing inquiries or investigations of how their addictive behavior led to suffering. This is a powerful technique for self-discovery and liberation, and like most aspects of this program, there is no one right way to do it. Some approach it in the same way as inventories in 12-step programs, and some don't. The goal is not to cause shame or to dwell on past traumas, but rather to turn toward the pain and confusion we have been running from and learn to meet it with kindness, forgiveness, and compassion. You may consider using the questions for inquiry as a starting place for your own exploration. If you need help, know that you're a part of a broader community of wise friends, the Sangha of people using Buddhist teachings to support their recovery. It's strongly encouraged for each person to have at least one wise friend or mentor in their group who they can check in with about their recovery. Especially when we are working with difficult aspects of our pasts, holding safe space will require wisdom and compassion. At any time, in groups as well as in every aspect of our lives, the reminder is that when in doubt, we can be present and we can be kind. Service and generosity. In Buddhism, dana, or generosity, is the first on the list of good qualities that lead a person to enlightenment. We often think of generosity in terms of money, and many groups use the word dana to describe the donations that members give to help support the meeting. Dana is a Sanskrit and Pali word that connotes the virtue of generosity. In the Buddhist tradition, though, dana is any act of giving, not just money, but also food, time, or our attention, without expecting anything in return. It can also take the form of giving to an individual in distress or need. You may already be familiar with the emphasis that many recovery programs put on service, which is consistent with this ancient teaching. The merit of this practice has been central to many religions and philosophies through the centuries. Generosity with our time, energy, and attention is not only of benefit to others on this path. In Buddhist thought, it has the effect of purifying and transforming the mind of the giver. As we become more generous, it also helps us loosen the grip of greed and attachment that cause so much of our own suffering. From the first time we mindfully put a couple of dollars in the offering bowl or introduce ourselves to a newcomer after a meeting, we can start to feel the benefit of being generous without asking for thanks. With our meditation practice, we learn through direct experience how our bodies and our wealth are impermanent, and this insight makes us more willing to do good with them while we still have them. Sharing our experience at a meeting, or even simply meditating along with others, and offering our silent encouragement and support is an act of kindness that benefits both ourselves and our SANGHA. Many of us have trained ourselves for years to be vigilant about being taken advantage of or ripped off. In some cases, such vigilance has certainly been justified, and there will always be times when we need to establish healthy boundaries. But as our practice deepens, we're able to do so with an attitude of discernment and compassion. In Buddhist teachings, generosity is not a commandment or a you should, or an unrealistic standard people are expected to measure themselves by, only to find themselves falling short. It is, instead, an illustration of our true nature, of the open and loving hearts that have always been within us, but have been covered up for so long that they were almost lost to us. The practice helps us to recover this original nature. As we try to cultivate generosity in our meetings and in our lives, we learn to trust our innate kindness, and we build confidence that we can give of ourselves and be safe. We continually examine what we perceive to be our limitations and grow in self-esteem, self-respect, and well-being as we see these limitations for what they are. Defensive strategies that may once have been necessary, but which have hardened into the handcuffs of habit. The voice of our attachments may say, I don't want to put my hard-earned money in that bowl. Or maybe I'll do this act of service, but I'll stop if people don't show enough appreciation. As we practice generosity, we see these fears more clearly and how they have kept us from growing. We begin to realize that this practice is really about creating more space in our hearts and minds. As we expand our capacity for generosity and compassion, our heart minds become more expansive and composed. This brings us greater feelings of happiness and self-respect, and gives our practice more strength and flexibility to look at the conditions of our lives and our recovery. We can see the benefits of such a practice when we think about the times when our minds and hearts were closed and protective. We felt on edge, uneasy, and usually didn't like ourselves very much. In that state, we had very few resources to face discomfort or confusion. We were often thrown off balance by even small setbacks. Painful or difficult experiences often overwhelmed us and sent us running for temporary relief through substances and/or behaviors. As we become more comfortable with a generous, open heart, we experience greater balance and ease. When something unpleasant arises, we don't have to worry that it will overpower us. We have a refuge we can increasingly rely on in times of trouble. And when a pleasant experience arises, we don't cling to it desperately, because we don't actually need it to feel good about ourselves. We practice generosity to be of service to others, to extend healing and happiness to all beings, and to try in some small way to reduce the suffering in this world. As we continue to work with generosity, we learn that the inner practice of recognizing the emptiness of our attachments and building up resilience is one and the same as the outer practice of giving and service.